All righty, we've got our crew back together today, and we are looking at chapters 26 through 31 of Moby Dick. Last time we let off, they had finally gotten out into the ocean, and we're starting off with two chapters, both of which are entitled Knights and Squires. And this is where Herman Melville is beginning to describe the character of both the first, second, and third mate and their harpooneers. Apparently, this is how expeditions are carried out in a whaling vessel. And chapter 26 starts telling us about the chief mate of the Pequod, and that's Starbuck. He's described as a very lean kind of man with this idea that there's nothing wasted inside of him. He was born of adversity, unusually conscientious. He doesn't trust anybody who isn't afraid of the whales on his vessel. He would prefer you to have a proper awe and reverence for whales. Sees courage as a useful thing, just like a harpoon or a lance, a boat, a butter. Both his father and one of his brothers died in whaling accidents. And there was something at the very end about democracy. So that's what we're getting into here in chapter 26. So what do you all think of Starbuck here? Did it make you think of coffee or?
I mean, the guy's got a lot of superstition and foreboding, and a lot of things kind of drawing his mind away from the job. It's a little interesting that he's a very kind of, as you said, conscientious guy, very kind of aware of what he's doing, but his mind is a little bit elsewhere, and I think we're seeing a lot of sort of foreshadowing. It seems like Ishmael is doing that. The way this guy approaches his job is not necessarily maybe the best one. I'm not entirely certain, but I did find it interesting here. One of the things I highlighted was that he says here, an utterly fearless man is a far more dangerous comrade than a coward. And I think we'll see some contrast with the other main guys that are going to be listed here in the next couple of chapters. Compared to this guy, that they're not at all like him with not really having too much use for courage outside of being a tool.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Ahab and the other captains, Bildad and the third one, would all pick him as the first mate, just on account of the cautiousness and the conscientiousness. It just seems a little different. That's all. And once again, he's a Quaker. That seems to come up again. I've never actually met a Quaker in real life. I wonder how many of them are left, but that keeps on coming up over and over again.
Yeah, so I went to Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they had a character named Starbuck too, didn't they?
Right, and she's like the lead pilot, right? Like she's getting into the whales, poking at them with her airship. And RJ needs a link. I found it really interesting because he gets like a lot of introduction, and like it goes off real badly at the end of the chapter. These other guys, they only have like a little bit, and one of the things that is really important is the skin, right? So he seems to be having no excess, right? Like he's just like pure interface with reality in some sense, but only with material reality. Like he seems to be somewhat apprehensive about things that consider the spirit, right? Like so the fear needs to be there, but like it's like a weird type of fear that allows him to have trust. it's not like a healthy fear in maybe. So yeah, more cannot withstand those more spiritual terrors. And then at a certain point, like there's this nobility behind him, and we get this idea about nobility more and more, right? Like there's this distinction between the knights, right, which are from the white, and then the squires that are the people who come from the islands and the indigenous people. And so like this nobility is worthy of throwing the costliest of their robes to him. So I guess that's related to honor and glory. Father Eric, do you have a biblical understanding of throwing of robes?
Yeah, so I think of when we talk to throwing robes on him, I think of the return of the prodigal son who comes back after having squandered his father's fortune, and the first thing he does is throws a robe over him to cover his nakedness. So also think of Jacob honoring one of his youngest sons, Joseph, with a coat of many colors. So there's a few. Yeah. So that's what comes to mind when you ask me that.
Yeah, I think Knights and Squires is significant too, right? The name of the 2 chapters for some reason. I double checked. It's not an error in the book. It's interesting that he does that. And yeah, there is this aspect. I mean, he points it out explicitly, right? Like, and this is all. So all the stuff you're hearing in the book about how long they go out and what happens and all this stuff. This is all in the New Bedford Whaling Museum. It's all validated and verified. Like none of this is made up in terms of who owns the boats. About 20% of the people that go out are islanders. So that's where this is Knights and Squires, right? Because he says in here, I forget where exactly, but he says like it's the Americans that run things. It's their brains that keep everything going. And that was the other point was when I was at the museum, they pointed out that New Bedford was known as the city that lit the world. So this is before Edison, right? So the idea of nighttime light is whales, not electricity. Everybody stops at electricity. That's not where it started at all. And that's actually really significant. And he's just making the case here for no, America is pushing this forward. There were people hunting whales before, but now this is this is significant because we're not doing all the work, we'll say, in America, but we're running everything. Like we're making sure that these things get done in the way that makes them happen and lights the world.
Alrighty. So there was this passage that I had a lot of trouble with, kind of near the end of chapter 26. It's talking about how, Starbuck represents a certain ideal for Ishmael, a certain amount of earthly glory, but he ultimately seems to hint that this is not going to be a glory that's going to sustain him. That there's going to be something that goes wrong here, and yeah, it's so I'll just go ahead and pop it back up on the screen here. That immaculate manliness we feel within ourselves, so far within us, that it remains intact through all the outer character seems gone, bleeds with keenest anguish at the undraped spectacle of a valor-ruined man. Nor can piety itself at such a shameful sight completely stifle her upbraidings against the permitting stars. But this august dignity I treat of is not the dignity of kings and robes, but that abounding dignity which has no robed investiture. Thou shalt see it shining in the arm that wields a pick or drives a spike, that democratic dignity which on all hands radiates without end from God himself, the great God absolute, the center and circumference of all democracy, his omnipresence, our divine equality. somebody help me out with that one because I'm having trouble with it.
Someone is echoing. Maybe we should fix that.
Could be me.
Yeah, Diego's gain is up a little high. Whoops, he didn't need to do that.
Now it's really low.
I'm almost getting at kind of taking that and then through the next couple of paragraphs leading to the end of the chapter where he's describing these kind of heroes that he's picked from, literary history that he, it's almost like he's kind of comparing the whaling heroes and these other guys to almost like a communion of saints of whaling, something like that, where it's like they're radiating and they've been the cold selectest champions from the kingly commons, as the in the last line there. It seems like it's like the cream of the crop is what he's kind of saying here, but that he goes a little far with the democracy thing for sure.
Yeah, well, I think he's picking out people who kind of came from nothing and made something of themselves. I know for a fact that described Andrew Jackson, and I suppose it might also describe Bunyan and Cervantes.
I'm glad that you brought up Andrew Jackson, Father. Given the relationship to some of the stuff that we pointed out with Dutch banking, for more, just anyone read anything about Jackson and read his epitaph. But I don't want to distract too much. I just think it's actually a relevant point.
So maybe we can break this down. That immaculate manliness we feel within ourselves, so far within us that it remains intact through all the outer, all the outer character seems gone. Because that's the first sentence fragment. Why he does this, I don't know, but I absolutely love it. I just love this sort of thing when they expand the English language a little bit. Like all he's saying there is that there's a manliness inside of you that remains intact in spite of all outward appearances. Right. But then the second part is this bleeds with keenest anguish at the undraped spectacle of a valor-ruined man. And so it's harmed in some way, that essence of manliness within yourself, right, that is there in spite of all the earthly robes or garments of skin, if you're a Peugeot fan. When it sees somebody, right, a spectacle of a valor-ruined man, right, his valor has been destroyed somehow. And then your inner manliness is affected, it bleeds. So that's what it's saying. Does that sound right, Father? Does that help at least with the first part? And then we can
Sure. Yeah. And this is kind of a lament for what's going to happen to Starbuck later on in the book. So more of that foreshadowing here, of which Ishmael gives us plenty. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the beginning, he hints to this in the beginning of the paragraph, but were the coming narrative to reveal in any instance the complete abasement of poor Starbuck's fortitude, right? So that's the framing for the paragraph. Mm-hmm. And then you're right, it's foreshadowing. Obviously, I haven't read it, but you have. So you're right, it's foreshadowing for what happens to him, but that is kind of explicit in the paragraph itself. And then I think what he's doing here is he's going on from, from that piece, right? From that manly piece. And then he's talking about piety itself, can't do anything about it.
Why?
Okay, so piety wants to upbraid the permitting stars, right? So the permitting stars would be fate. And why would you allow this to happen to such a good man, oh fate? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I see it a little bit differently, right? So you have this man who's completely built up, like he's like a god among men, right? And then he falls, right? Like, and he's in the mud, right? And then it's like, well, can you keep yourself upright, right? Because that's the pious behavior. The pious behavior would keep you going, right? Like it would sustain you despite of the material telling you no, right? Like
Okay.
it would keep you up straight.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think so what Ishmael sees in Starbuck is this august dignity that he treats of at the end. That Starbuck
Right.
Came from humble beginnings. He didn't come from royal blood. He didn't come from a noble family. But God Himself, he places.
It's the meritocracy.
Yeah, it's a meritocracy,
Right.
and Ishmael looks at that as having its source in God Himself.
Exactly.
And so it's basically like Starbuck represents the best that democracy has to offer. That's
and
it.
it's not enough.
And it's not enough. Yeah. Oh boy. Yep. That
Well,
works.
and maybe by being its best, it's also its worst. Like that's also a way of looking at it, right? Because if the ideal is the hope, right, or at least the ideal is generated by the hope of democracy, right, and if you get like the fulfillment of democracy and then it shows that it's still lacking, then what is the ideal?
It's not enough.
Yes.
If I could just jump in here, and just for the sake of time and clarity, in my own notes, something that I had planned on bringing up because intention is important. And to prove it, here's my terrible handwriting. The squires, specifically in the case of Stubb, my understanding from my reading is Tashtigo, so that they come in pairs.
Yes.
And specifically, interestingly, and this is a brief aside, or perhaps front running, I can't tell. So Stubb and Tashtigo, and Stubb is second to what's my hand right here? Starbuck, and Starbuck that would place potentially Starbuck and Queequeg at the knight level. Which is,
I think the three mates are the knights, and then
The three spearmen are the squires.
that's squires. I
Right.
think that's the structure right there.
and
Yep.
interestingly, where does that place Ishmael?
He's just on the crew.
Right.
Yeah, he's not talking about himself here.
No,
It's
right. I'm juxtaposing something because there's a partnership, for lack of a better word, in my mind, between Ishmael and Queequeg, and yet Queequeg,
Mhm.
we went in an earlier session about like Queequeg and what boat's he going to be on, and how much of that was planned by the author or by Queequeg is a completely different conversation that we don't have time for. But there's still clearly a relationship of some sort, and I'm going to be a little tinfoil hatty, a relationship on this boat between and before and after that we've been moving through, because the book starts with meeting essentially Queequeg, and so there's a relationship that Queequeg has both to Starbuck that is not like Ishmael and is not like Ahab, but at Ahab I'm front running.
Right, and I think that's part of the point of this is that there aren't two classes. There's going to end up being more than two classes, and that's important that there are classes and that there are more than two, because you really need more than 2 points of contrast to see, basically, or at least to see clearly. And that's actually what he's setting up here. It's amazing how language creation and Moby Dick and all the stuff I talk about on navigating patterns and all the stuff that's sort of talked about in the Peterson sphere is all right here. Peugeot, it's all right here.
I didn't mean to find it, and I don't remember where this is from. And again, I should actually build a tinfoil hat. But anyway, there's a saying in symbology circles where there is one, there is two, where there is two, there is three. And that's what I'm seeing here at this point in the text. And I've made it all about me, so I'm going to go back to practicing some knots. Where's my? Here we go.
That's nuts. I mean, never mind.
Nutty.
Speaking of hats, I just got to give flowers to Sir. How are you saying this, Sir Chasselot?
A lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
My fishing rod's down in the basement, but next time I'm gonna catch you. I need a harpoon.
Yeah, I'm just really angry at Castle right now because he's
Why?
just upstaging me so
I'm
much.
sorry.
You know what, Mark? You want to feel better? I'll make you feel better. There you go.
He's still upstaging me somehow. It's wonderful. I love it, but also,
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, thanks for your insights on that. I've got a much better understanding of Melville's crazy prose here. I don't think this is a book that's safe for you to read alone. I think you need to have
Yes.
a crew, just like trying to sail across the Pacific Ocean by yourself. While it might be technically possible, it's much more fun with friends.
Okay,
So,
guys, I apologize in advance, but I have to do this.
okay, as long as
you put me next to the whale. Okay.
Oh boy.
Mark, this is why I sit in the corner
Thank
where
you.
where all the distracting kids sit.
You're right. Yes. Well, you've redeemed yourself by slaying the upstager for
Oh,
me.
the cup.
So I can buy you. The cup is great. Yeah. I can buy you dinner now later.
All
after
I
this.
have is a little drinky bird. We can do this another time. Back to the book. I'm so sorry.
So
No. It's fine.
like I want to go to the last paragraph. It's like there's something with the election, right? How does God manifest the democratic spirit, right? So first he's talking about radiate from God, right? Which is something I could get into, but then it's like no, this is the great democratic God, right? Like there's a sense in which the God, right? Like he's getting these people to drift up among the demos, right? And to be pearls. And yeah, I like I had to think more about it, but I think he's setting 3 frames in which the drifting up happens, right? And so there's 3 qualities that he's trying to. But he's contrasting the democratic with the kingly, right? So because that's the obvious British authority structure, right? And he's taking that from the democratic. Engaging that from the democratic frame, I guess that's what's happening there.
Yeah. He's got this great phrase at the end. Ever cullest thy selectest champions from the kingly commons. Right? So it's like, hold on. Like the commons are what everybody has, and then like the king's way up there on the throne. And you're saying that the spirit that makes, God, or one of the things that God does anyway, is selecting champions from the commons and making them into kings. And then he asks it, the very last sentence, bear me out in it, oh God, right? He's asking for that same sort of elevation that a very popular president like Andrew Jackson was given.
Yeah, and that's equality doctrine right there, which is fascinating. I mean, it sounds like Melville is fighting against equality doctrine through the very democratic process that the U.S. was born from in some sense.
Yeah. Alrighty. Anybody have anything else they want to say about 26? Alrighty. So we got Starbuck. Now we're going to talk about Stub. Stub is, the name just kind of fits him. His nose ends kind of quickly. He's got these beady little eyes, and he's always smoking a pipe. It's like the first thing he does when he gets out of bed is he lights a pipe up and starts smoking it. And the way Melville describes him as just being utterly calm. And he's got this great line about how when death comes, Stubbs just going to respond to it like any other order that he's given on the ship. And it's like, well, I guess it's time for that. And then we get Flask, and all Flask wants to do is fight whales. There's not much more to him apparently. So kind of like the descending quality from Starbuck. It's like it's the quality of men you get are just lesser much more quickly. And then that's the first three mates. Is you've got Starbuck, Stubb, and Flask, and then they each have their harpooneers. Starbuck being paired with Queequeg, Stubb being played with paired with Tashtigo, and Flask being paired with Dagu. Tashtigo is a native. Apparently stayed in New England throughout all of the conflicts between the natives and the colonists and all of that. And he's got this kind of lean, mysterious look to him. And Dagu is this gigantic African fellow. And it's at this point that Melville notes that all of the officers are American, but most of the crew is made up of foreigners. And he references this Klutz character, who was an anarchist figure in the French Revolution. And Klutz he was an anarchist, but he wanted to form a one world government, which is just one of those ridiculous things that they could have only come up with during the French Revolution. And so he describes it as being like this crew is sort of the embodiment of his failed vision in the French Revolution. Robespierre obviously had his head cut off. So, yeah.
You're skipping a few steps, but then again, it was all extra steps anyway.
That's right. It was all extra steps to the end. I want to point out something. So, and I did a tiny amount of digging anyway, not sufficient. But Starbuck is Nantucket stock, right? And the point had been made earlier that Nantucket stock is Benjamin Franklin stock. So that's his grandmother was, right? So it's not Benjamin Franklin sort of populated Nantucket with his
Mark,
goodness.
Can you point out how this actually means a lot to the locals? And Benjamin Franklin's a big, like, not just aside from Benjamin Franklin, I want to just juxtapose who wrote the Crucible and all that stuff, because like this is in part why that's a big deal.
Yeah, well, I just want to highlight. I don't want to go like real deep into.
No. I think the citation's enough. That's all.
Yeah, I don't want to get into all the citations and such. I just want to say, like, there is a lineage, and that is American royalty, or as close as we get. But also you'll notice that Stubb is a native of Cape Cod, right? And he was called a Cape Cod man. So there's a certain type of person on Cape Cod to this day, only for the natives. There's a lot of money on Cape Cod that came in later. There's also some money that was there all along. Like there's some names on Cape Cod that were there forever. And then we have a native of Tisbury in Martha's Vineyard. Okay, so Martha's Vineyard is the large island, sort of north and west of Nantucket, right? And so in Massachusetts, it's not really Cape Cod. You can say Cape Cod all day long, but everybody means the Cape and Islands, right? And there's two big islands that are accessible to everybody, and that's Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard. There's a bunch of other islands, though. Like the Elizabeth Islands completely obscures the harbor of New Bedford. So like New Bedford is not open to the wide ocean at all, at any angle. The Elizabeth Islands, and I was there at the Whaling Museum last week, and the Elizabeth Islands, like you just look out New Bedford Harbor and the Elizabeth Islands are right there. They're not like way on the horizon. They're right there. They're not super in front, but like you're well protected and you can't see a break in them. There are breaks in them, obviously. There are a string of islands, but there are breaks in them. But they're talking about a certain line or lineage and type based on those lineages, right? And at one point too, they mentioned one of the other guys is from Gay Head, right? Which is a western promontory of Martha's Vineyard, right? And so the Martha's Vineyard is a very large island. I think it's at least twice the size of Nantucket. And there's little villages on the island. I've been there a few times. It's beautiful. If you ever get a chance to go, you should go. It's very nice. But there's little villages on the island, and each village has its own little, claim and culture associated with it. So that's really what he's doing, is tying together the different cultures within New England, tying Nantucket to the royalty of the founding, but also tying these other villages, which are almost, I think all the villages on the vineyard are like, there's one or two where it was old families, and the rest are basically indentured servants, right? And so the villages are based on the indentured servitude, because you're indentured servant for 5 years generally in the U.S., and then you were given land. Like, it wasn't a bad deal at all. Everybody thinks it's a bad deal, slavery. No, it's not. It's not the kind of slavery you'd object to. You get like 5 or 10 acres of land at the end of the 5 years, and you do whatever you want with it. And it's provisions. Like, it's not just, here's your land and see you later, bye. So it's actually a good deal. That's why they took it in for passage, because it was valuable to the people on the boat. It was so valuable. They're like, yeah, we'll give up some of our land to you after 5 years of service, plus the boat trip. Obviously, where you're I don't think your service begins on the boat. I think it begins when you land, but whatever. That was because you never knew how long the voyage was going to take. And so they're tying together and exemplifying all these different cultures within America to these exotic cultures, which is, again, 20% or 26, somewhere in that range, of the whalemen are actually not Americans, but they're leaving from American ports. And they're not all from Portugal, right? They're not all from Africa. They're not all from the Philippines. They're not all from Hawaii. They're from all of those places. That's the 26%, is this huge mix. But actually, it's all mixed, because the United States is all mixed at this point, or what passes through the United States. So you don't have a lot of states at this point.
I was actually curious, because of the way that the three knights and then also their respective squires are kind of presented in the order that they're presented. I was wondering if you also saw some correlation between their kind of personalities and dispositions and backgrounds with where they came from geographically, because it seems like there's kind of like descending. So you go from Starbuck, who is kind of like this very uptight. I mean, even his skin is very tight. There's nothing, but also his personality is very uptight. And then you have Queequeg is kind of like the noble islander that, like, literally from island nobility under him. And then you have the next guy, Stubb, who is a good-humored, fun-loving guy, likes comfort and everything. But he's kind of middle of the pack, and he's still very competent. And then he is followed by his squire, who is the Native American huntsman. And then after that, you have what's the last guy's name?
Flask.
Flask. That he's particularly violent and not necessarily very much like the other guys, and he's paired in a very high contrast scenario because he's a very short guy, very violent sort of dude. He's paired in high contrast with the most foreign guy, who is a very bodied African man. And so there's kind of, I'm seeing this kind of thing of like, okay, they're going further out as you kind of go further into the descriptions of these three guys. That all of them are kind of like further away in disposition and in where they came from.
So I actually want to connect that back to the three captains as well. And I think there's a pattern there, right? So there's you have the earthly, right? Then you have the heavenly, because
Pellet and build that.
Yeah, the guy with the smoke, right? Like he's like protected in a cloud, right? Like he's isolated in some sense, and the other guy is prince of the powers of the air, right? And then the last guys, they seem like really participatory, right? Like they seem like just embedded in the world, like just facing it head on, not wanting to interface with it, just going with the spirit as it presents itself. So the African guy, he's basically lived his life where the ship took him, right? Like he doesn't have his own identity. Like he's lived just like the other guy, right? Like he's lived within the fight with what's it called with the weather and the environment and all that stuff, and then you have Ahab, who also, well, I'll get more into him, but he's also like this figure that's just part of where he's at in some sense. Like he's just there.
So on the excuse me, guys, I'm still getting over a bit of a cold. Speaking of Tisbury Flask, as I like to call him, I'd like to point out that he's described as unfearing, and he holds an important pipe, similar to Queequeg, and that he specifically hums, but I like to think of it as singing as well, while he fights monsters. That's a bit of a paraphrase, but mostly a direct quote. And also, and in my perspective, importantly, is described in quote, not a crusader after peril. And we don't have to go to the song, and I don't have to play anything, but I like to imagine he holds one of these. So I'm just gonna put this over here.
I'm seeing a connection to that as well. You mentioned that he's a musical guy, and as kind of the one that's at the lowest, I guess, or like the most kind of, the least heavenly, most earthly kind of pairing of these ones. That you look at this thing, he hums, presumably cyclical tunes, and then you've got the African dude that has giant hoop earrings and everything. So as you kind of get down there, there's a lot of this kind of cyclicality that's going on, at the bottom.
Well, and also a flattening.
Yeah.
Flask is a very flat view of the world, and that is exemplified by, to RJ's excellent point, it's not just that he's single-minded, he also doesn't see these other pieces. He pays them no mind, right? He's blind to them in some sense. And so Flask is an excellent archetype in this book for the flattening of the world. And the flattening of the world around a singular goal to some extent, which is just kill whales. That's what kill whales. And it seems to be vengeance, right, from the outside, but from the inside, like from Flask's perspective, you get the sense that Melville's telling you here that he doesn't see it as vengeance because he can't see vengeance at all. Like that's not his concern, but that's clearly what's actually driving him. And that I think is brilliant.
He describes it as it just being like a matter of fact question of nature, right? That he's just to be there slaying them, right? There is a felt sense of this is just the way things are ordered, and yeah, exactly. There's this, I would say, well, it's not even. It's not conviction because it's not propositional conviction, but it's more like embodied. Just
Yes. Well, it's true conviction. No conviction is propositional. Like you can't tell me about your conviction. You can convey something close, but you can't actually be convicted.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point, Mark.
And frankly, the qualities that you have in Flask of somebody who just sets their mind to one thing and works really hard, if that's properly oriented, you love to be around that.
Yep.
If it's somebody who's working on a construction crew and he's really good at rough carpentry and he just puts houses up, you love to be around that because he's just going to build the house.
Right, but properly oriented, I think, is the key here, Father. So my proposal, I am prepared to be corrected or wrong or whatever on this, is that the contrast is between Flask and Starbuck. Starbuck being properly oriented and Flask being incapable of proper orientation. And what that looks like is that you're doing what seems to be the right thing for a very long time before the very big error comes along, and this is more Nassim Taleb, right, and just wipes you out. And the difference is, I think, ultimately going to be, you guys have read it, I have not, I've never read it out of the book club. And I'm exactly where I'm exactly at 31, right? I've read it all the way through 31. And I suspect what's going to happen is one is going to get remembered, maybe through time, as I'm watching the Battlestar Galactica reboot, where one of the main characters' name happens to be Starbuck, by the way, and the other will be forgotten maybe in time, because maybe the name is banal and utilitarian. Just a guess.
Like Flask.
There's a really good sentence here, like just above where it was before. kind of exemplifying this flattening, that from Flask's perspective, it says the wondrous whale was but a species of magnified mouse, or at least a water rat.
Yes.
He's just smashing rats. Like that's all he's really there for. And he has. It's interesting the way that we were kind of talking about Cain and Abel yesterday. There's he lacks discernment, and then we're going to be seeing potentially this sort of thing of the guy who is the head, or the more heavenly guy, Starbug. You said is kind of the polarity here. That we're kind of getting some foreshadowing of this, like when the pastor is struck, the sheep will scatter type of thing. And that once that guy loses his head, or his cool or whatever it is, this guy is just going to, like that thing with the AI that makes nothing but paper clips. That it's just going to keep on doing that. It only knows one end, and it's just like it's going to be interesting to see him without any direction.
Yeah, you're right. The flattening's explicit here. The sort of compression, reduction, the flattening of the world. This is the flattening of the world character. And he's contrast with Starbuck, because one has proper orientation, and the other one, to your point, Castle, because he does not have discernment, flattens the world. Starbuck doesn't flatten the world because he doesn't have discernment, right? And because he doesn't have discernment and he flattens the world, he can't be in proper orientation except by accident, right? But maybe that's not a good, like if somebody's there by accident, maybe you rely on them very carefully or something, but not too much and not for too long.
If I can add here too, though, he's also described here by the other shipmates as the king post, the short square timber that serves to brace the ship against the icy concussions of those battering seas. So I guess, there's a utility to that as well.
And that's a specialized part of a special boat. It's not on every boat, right? It's for Antarctic expeditions. It's not for this. It's not for a whaling trip.
Yeah, because they're going to off the shore of Ecuador, right? So I think they mentioned at one point they're getting into the tropics.
Right,
at some
they're
point
in the tropics.
And they will get out of the tropics.
Yeah, that's true.
They're set to go anywhere, right? They don't know where they're going.
They do know. They know roughly where they're going. They know they're going to the Pacific, and that actually matters a lot, right? Because which horn are you going around, Africa or South America? The two are very different. They're both fantastically dangerous. Like on a boat like that, fantastically dangerous. And in particular, Father Eric and I were talking about this earlier. In particular, when we get to that point, we're not there yet. We'll go over how weird and dangerous the South American crossing is around the Horn.
Why it's what justifies all of the expense and all of the lost lives in building the Panama Canal, because it's still better to do that than it is to go all the way around. And it's not just because of the time that it takes.
The Panama Canal is the second canal, by the way, that they tried to build. So it's not like that was the first time they tried it. They just failed the first time and lost a lot.
I have to jump in here. I poke at the French. Mark, there's only a couple of things that I do and don't tolerate, and this is a side joke, which is rude, but it's an Austin Powers reference for our friend Manuel. For more, join the Discord, folks. But the point.
I was looking for less of it.
It's all good. No, sorry, I just lost it. What were we talking about a second ago? I got the joke.
Crossing into Cape Horn.
No, yeah, so super dangerous. Geez, I had three thoughts at once and then I lost them. I'm so sorry, guys. Let's just keep going.
Alrighty, we'll keep going, and if they come back, make sure you get them in.
We were talking about
Let me re-listen real quick. I'll figure it out.
Going to ports and all that stuff last week, and now they said they only visit pagan ports.
No, they do go in ports. They go for 3 years, 46 months, according to the Whaling Museum, which sounds about right. It takes a very long time to do that. And you do have to justify going around the horn because it is a very big deal.
Okay, so I remembered what it was. To the point about how important the Panama canals are, and like the thing that I was originally going to make the joke about was about the French. You have to give credit where credit is due. If I'm not mistaken, the French did try to build several canals, and I think we bought out the project from the French. And say what you want about their philosophy and how they run their country, because we already made the joke about their revolution and rebellion, all that good stuff. But there are certain facts about the world which kind of, no matter what you're dealing with, you're kind of gonna get mugged by reality a little bit. And one of those muggings, to me at least, is like, okay, a canal is worth it. Like, it is actually worth it, because think about the time and labor loss. But let's put that aside. When you are able to access goods more quickly and less dangerously, goods can be sold at a cheaper price. More people can actually access the foodstuffs and the resources, and trade can happen. Basically, it's not high tide lifts all ships. You're actually putting more water into the glass, to make a loose metaphor. So these canals, these creatings of almost roads of waterways through land, through which a ship can pass, the way a water can pass through a mountain, um, to make a slight Taoist gesture. These things are not just, hey, the French do crazy French things and we bought them out. It's like, life's like a parfait and a partay. It's got layers. But now I'm done being distracting again, I swear.
That's
For now.
fine. That's fine. That's the best argument for neoliberal economics that I've heard in a while.
I'm not telling you what my economic standpoint is here. I'm just like, I can cite my sources, but Mark said we're just having a book club.
Yeah.
Shipping is the cheapest. Shipping across the oceans or across water in general is the cheapest way to ship anything, right? Particularly heavy things, because the way ships work is the heavier it gets, it's not a stable ratio, right? And so ships can carry very heavy cargo with very little extra money, because once you get moving in the water, which is expensive, you kind of keep moving. And canals are next. And canals revolutionized the United States in a particular way, again, to RJ's point, and then trains, right? And the only thing cheaper is pipelines, but pipelines can only do liquids, basically, in barrels and things like that. So it's actually important to realize that the shipping revolution, whaling in particular, is an important revolution because you're carrying the oil commodity, not the oil that comes out of the ground, but actually a more important oil. And all of this is as a result of candle making, by the way. That's why it's the spermaceti whale and spermaceti oil, which is quite sweet. They had some at the museum that you can smell, right? It's quite sweet smelling. It is the engine that lights the world, right? And the blubber is the candles that also help light the world, right? So we only
Right.
have
He
candles.
even makes the claim that it's what we use to anoint kings. But as we move on, and great way to do that, um, oceans are something like highways, canals are something like roads. Elijah showed up earlier in the book, and chariots are a thing. And now you've got a boat on a road going through land that's also a water. And I mean, this is my perspective. It's a bit chariot-ish now. But to going back to the French thing, um, part of what made St. Louis, and New Orleans was St. Louis is on this kind of road of the water, natural canal, Mississippi River, which is incredibly important to everything, by the way. And then you've got New Orleans. And
Yeah.
I hate to make this gesture, but I can't stop myself sometimes. It's New Orleans. And for people who don't know a lot of French history, Orleans is an incredibly important city. And New Orleans is an incredibly important city. And what does it have? It has a lock system, and it's got canals. It's a little bit Amsterdamish, but that's a different conversation. But juxtaposing New Orleans to Nantucket is an important point when we're talking about building a canal that goes by where, and where is that central point besides the canal that the canal's going to, is those goods are going to St. New Orleans in part by way of New Orleans. And there's the cotton rum triangle between New Orleans, Nantucket, and essentially the old world. And what connects those is the highways and the roads that is very briefly gestured out here in the book, but worth diving into.
Yes, indeed. Too bad the Panama Canal did not exist at the time of publishing for this book, and they have to go all
Well,
the way
it
around.
also
Okay.
kind of killed the whaling industry.
I bet
Well,
it did.
Yeah.
That and all the whales we slaughtered because of bad science, by the way.
Save the
because
tuna.
of corporate greed.
I'm going after this whale, but save the tuna.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of saving the tuna, let's talk about Ahab. Coming up, unless somebody's got something else they want to bring up on chapter 27, but
I kind of stepped on Mark's point about the sperm oil and going into oil and anointing in kings because Ahab's a king, and that's actually, I don't want to miss that.
Yeah, that's why he mentions it. He's the king of the oil trade in some sense, right? Or at least in this framing of the book. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning Pip real quick.
I mean, he even has a vertical supply chain control. We talked about how he doesn't even pay the fees. So yeah, he is a king.
Yeah, this looks like more foreshadowing to me, Father.
it is. It is. We haven't met Pip yet. You will.
Right, but that's what I mean. Like he's foreshadowing pretty heavily here because he mentions a character he hasn't introduced on purpose. Again, the unreliable narrator.
Yeah, I just wanted to tag on the image that Mark made on the boats being cheap labor and being able to cheap transport and being able to carry disproportionately more weight. I think we will see in this especially in coming to the next chapter that the ships can carry many more things other than cargo. So and they
besides
will
just
carry
oil,
many heavy things. Yes.
Well, and the thing about a ship is the crime in a ship is to have the ship come into port not full. Right? Like the efficiency is in keeping the ship weighted down with as much cargo as you can.
And the cool thing is all the ones that sink become little archaeological digs. Like you guys want to check out some cool archaeology? Check out what scuba divers get up to. They found a perfect condition sailing vessel, I believe, in the Black Sea recently. Yeah. And because the composition of the Black Sea, there was almost no decay, and they were able to date everything. So not only are ships little chariots, they're little temples too.
Little temples and little time capsules.
Since we're doing ship history, also this is how Rome could be Rome, because they needed a lot of food. And
Dolenda Carthago Est. That's how they got their ships.
Yeah.
Rome didn't know how to sail, and then one washed up. Yeah.
The port between Rome and the ocean was more important than Rome, and that's where the wealth was.
It's not Ostia, is it? I think it's Ostia.
Ostia, yeah.
Ostia, yeah.
Yeah, no, Rome is founded on a swamp, much like Washington, D.C., but don't take that.
And the Netherlands. Oh.
I'm sorry, where are you streaming from, Father?
I'm streaming from our nation's capital.
Oh, cool, so you can say it.
Yeah, I can say it. It is a swamp.
I'm there too. I can say it too.
Factually accurate.
Technically
correct, the best kind of correct, but moving on past kings and the different types of oils onto the one who is anointed himself, our good friend Ahab.
Yes. Well, first off, it is this interesting bit that Ahab stays underneath for a long time. And so Ishmael doesn't get to see him for a while. Ishmael finds, we're moving on to chapter 28, Ishmael finds comfort in thinking about the quality of the three mates there. And he thinks this is going to be a good voyage, no matter what. We've got these three guys here. And I don't need to worry about what Elijah said, just because these guys are great. But then finally, Ahab comes up. And Ahab's got this strange figure that he brings to the deck of the ship. You can tell he's kind of an older man. and he just looks tough as heck. Somebody that you really ought not mess with. But he's got this scar running down his face, and he looks like he's constantly in pain. Although, as they make their way south past Ecuador, that pain seems to lessen a little bit. So yeah, this is our first look at Captain Ahab, King Ahab, and him going all along the deck with his whalebone leg. The very thing that took his leg off is now supporting him.
So I had a pretty strange experience while reading, because I was getting real Exodus vibes, where God is hidden and reveals himself. And then I get to the part where Ahab comes on deck and like he's not consumed by the flames. I'm like, holy cow! like how's that real? But yeah, like I think if we go all the way back, I was talking about Ahab being this thing that this unknown that's nabbing at the conscious, right? And so now this unknown is progressively being made known, right? Like in some sense, the introduction of the crew is also like making the ground clear, so that Ahab can walk into it, and yeah, then he comes up, right? Like and then there's this figure, there's this imposition, right? And there's just this being, right? Like he's described as a being. It's like it just is. Like it's not a person. Like it's a force of nature that's manifesting, and he's the authority, right? And like the authority speaks from below, right? Like he's already saying what needs to happen, right? He's leading Israel into the desert from his hidden thing, and then he has these three persons that have a relationship with him, but it's not really clear if they have actually, like, he's actually there, or whether like they're talking out of their ass, right? But because of the authority and there's some sort of coherence, like there's a revelation of that there's actually a person speaking, right? Like there's a will behind that which they draw up, and then yeah, you get to these other stages where he's he's basically, how do I say this? He's coming closer to the people, right? Like there's a relationality, but there's still not a real participation in the relationality until a transgression gets made, right? And then with the transgression, there's also like fear, punishment, like there's a whole stuff going on there. But yeah, I'll stop there.
I wanted to add to that just that with the kind of progressive revelation of Ahab, that it is also happening in conjunction with the weather changing in relation to where the ship is geographically. So he's not seen at all when it's foggy and misty and everything. And then the more sun is out, like the more light is coming down on the boat, the more frequently he's out there, until he's out there so much that it's actually a question of, like, he leaves to go inside, but he spends so much time, and he's not actually necessarily needed out there. He's just kind of like watching everyone, and everyone's just kind of very nervous. And he's on this, like, he's standing on this pillar of death, essentially, that has replaced his leg, that's made out of the thing that he's most invested in. And then he's standing perfectly straight. So he's like this really super upright figure. And what I thought was interesting is there's a lot of references to graves, especially with respect to like sleeping and stuff throughout this chapter. But he has these holes that are like, I guess, kind of ground into some parts of the deck that he's on, so that he can stand more straightly. And so it's almost like, he has one leg, or, like 1 foot in the grave in many ways, and that it actually recesses into the ship, and he has multiple ones. So he has lots of little shallow graves around the around the ship that are all just kind of scattered about.
Yeah, and they also are a warning, right, to all the shipmates. Like they hear the heel coming, like death is upon us. Like,
And when they're trying to sleep, Ishmael says that they're dreaming of the gnashing teeth of sharks. That is the like the weird sickly clang of the bone against the wood.
But I wanna point out how it starts with this. Yes, their supreme lord and dictator was there, though hitherto unseen by any eyes, not permitted to penetrate into the now sacred retreat of the cabin.
Yeah, it's like the ark.
Yeah, and then interestingly, they talk about this this story further on. He was dismasted off Japan, and that's actually a really important thing to kind of understand from a seafaring aspect. When you lose the mast of your ship, it's over. Like everything ends. It's a bad thing. Um, it would not be unfair to say that although capsizing a boat, which did happen, and I've been on many a capsized boat, mainly because we had a catamaran, and my father used to like to run it on one pontoon, and he always ran it cheap. Always, every time I was on the boat, he dunked it. But on the big ships, it's much harder to do. But actually, I would say that's much less dangerous as long as the mast is intact than just losing a mast. Like you lose any mast and your boat is in real trouble. And the thing is, he mentions this, but like his dismasted craft, he shipped another mast without coming home for it. He has a quiver of them. Right. So there's this dismasting of the ship, but also dismasting of him as a person. And he keeps coming back in some sense. He keeps, without going home, he seems able to refashion a mast. And actually, sailors in the old days would have a shipwright aboard, or at least a shipwright's apprentice, in case they lost a mast or needed a new boom or something needed to be fixed. And then the other thing I found out they mentioned it in the book, but it's also in the museum. They had a cooper with them to make barrels for the oil and the blubber. And so they have craftsmen and tools on board because you're on the ship, you're out for 3 years for real, right? This is a big deal. And so you have to have craftsmen in case something breaks, because things are going to break. There's no question about it. And you may have to go into port or do something until you can get into a port to fashion a new whatever. Fortunately, it's all wood, and wood's fairly easy to work with. There's different woods that are easier than others, but this whole imagery of dismasting is really important because when you dismast a boat, you destroy the boat. In some sense, it no longer functions properly.
It can't navigate or steer. Basically, it's got no power.
It loses power, and so the navigation and steering, such as it is limited. And if you have like a 3-masted ship, you could lose 3 masts. And that was like, if you lose the main mast, you're probably also losing the other 2. It's not guaranteed, but it's, that's for sure. Like that's pretty common because they're smaller masts.
So
That's
Can
really
I just point one other boat out since Mark brought up catamarans? Mark, you ever sell lasers?
Oh yeah. I sail the
Okay.
laser.
You know how fragile those things are?
Oh no, they're ridiculous. I don't like lasers at all.
I will tell you over dinner sometime.
Tonight,
The overall point is that if you are out in a laser, which for folks at home, this thing's like maybe 6 feet long ish. That's a big one. It's designed for one person, really kind of, it's a learning boat for kids, but it's also a racing boat for adults.
Yeah.
And you're really not, you can take them out past the shoals if you're good at what you do. You shouldn't do it if you're in a cape and you don't know where the winds are going. But the point is that this kind of boat, something in between, it's basically lasers, a scaled down big boat. There's no jib, but it's a scaled down big boat.
One sail, one mast.
Right. And it's a removable rudder. I don't want to get into that anyway. It's so small and fragile that even if they're made out of steel today, if you capsize in the coral, you will break your mast.
Yeah.
and you are dead in the water, and that's just a small scale example. So if you're out in this highway of the ocean where there's no one for miles, you need to have a couple of arrows in your quiver, because the mast is what allows you to orient yourself in the world, and it's a small center kind of what's it, Mundi? Globus Mundi, but it's also a small cross at the center of at the center of the boat, which moves not unlike the tabernacle.
Yeah,
Um,
I was gonna make a connection with the pillars that hold up the heavens, right? Like the mast and the pillar of the leg, right? Like in some sense, they allow the tellus to manifest. Like I think that's maybe a good way to see it, because the mast is allowing the ship to move, like and also
But
also to.
ships are funny. They're kind of upside down because the thing that gives it direction is on the bottom, and the thing that gives it power is on the top.
Yep.
and the thing that moves it is not actually the water, as opposed to a
Right.
chariot.
But
Yeah.
Father Eric, that's why ships are feminine.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. But they're also
this-
kicking you out of the
Yes,
chaos.
this is such a duh point, but I appreciate it, Manuel.
But
Oh
I think
boy.
I think actually there's aside from the really important symbolism, the thing that maybe people are missing about, because I use the word orientation a lot, especially on navigating patterns. Without the main engine, which is what the main mast is, it's the main engine in the center of the ship, and it provides most of the driving power. While you can quote orient as an individual act, like you can figure out which way to point next, because orientation is not direction. You can't go, there's no one orientation. Orientation is a process. You can't actually orient because your orientation is broken without the motive force. Unless you're moving, you're not orienting. You may say you're orienting because you're pointing, but pointing and orienting aren't the same thing. Orientation only makes sense if you're able to move to one point and then move and turn and move to the next point. Then you're orienting. Otherwise, you're not orienting.
Speaking of points, I just wanted to finish put the final cap on mine. I see Ahab in a way as a Moses figure.
I don't think you're incorrect.
In a way, not entirely.
Yeah,
As a Moses-like figure, only in as much as he's captain.
Mhm,
But for the
mhm.
purposes of the book, Ahab's captain.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that would actually be the case for any ship's captain. And just a little spoiler, he won't be the only captain that we get to meet. We actually get to observe other ship's captains at various little points in this book. I don't think it's that big of a spoiler, Mark. So,
Oh, okay, good.
yeah.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
If you can draw something out of the text by foreshadowing it, just by looking at where you are in the text, that's not a spoiler. That's just the author did a good thing, and people are doing good things by finding it. So, yay.
So I also want to point out, like it's interesting that with the anecdote, he's binding the fractal layers, right? So he's comparing the mast to the captain, and so he's building this symbolical relationships on the ship.
That's the self-similar fractal pattern of reality. Right? This book is full of that, and it's well done. It's very well done.
I wanted to also mention, because as you said, the ship is pretty much done for without the mast, and that there must have been quite a bit of time needed to repair that, especially if they were out in the middle of the water. But also when Ahab lost his pillar, I don't know if that was on the same occasion or if it was a separate one that had happened. Elijah described that it was that he laid as though dead for 3 days as well before coming back, and then. I am not sure if we know which one of his legs it was. I'd be interested to know if it was the left or the right one.
We'll see if Ishmael tells us.
I want to know what it's made out of at this point in the story. I can't remember, but I'm
whale
going back for water in a second. It's whalebone. There we go.
It's the jaw of a whale.
And he sits on a whalebone throne as well, or it's like a stool with 3 legs, but yeah, it's a throne with 3 points.
He's important because he actually has a place to sit on the deck of a ship.
And it's made entirely of ivory. Yeah.
All right, so that was our introduction to Ahab. As grim and imposing, and that demasted off Japan with 3 words. Look at how much meaning old Herman Melville put into 3 words. It's incredible. That's why I have you guys here. You point these things out for me. It's great.
And would it be fair to like have Japan be like the most alien thing out there?
Possible.
Yeah.
They hadn't gone to the moon yet, so I think so.
Yeah, and also again, like going back to the reference of power, like being the motor, the mass being the motor. Again, Ahab's ship lost its mast, but that ship had Ahab, and that ship made it back. So they lost the mast, but they had Ahab. This is a monstrous figure. It's a very powerful
When he
individual.
did it without going home. I mean, a lot of
Exactly.
ships dismast and then get home. It just takes freaking forever because they lost their main motor, right? And so they're able to cobble something together or whatever. You can do interesting things like with a boat with a jib. I used to steer the boat with the jib when the rudder was broken. So you can do amazing things. The boat's going along and being steered by one sail. That can happen. It takes some skill. Skill which hopefully I still have. We'll find out someday soon. We'll get back in a boat and sail away. But yeah, it's actually, you're right, Diego. It's really important to understand what, like the accomplishment. Like he's out in the field fixing the boat. And the implication is he went home full. Right?
Mhm.
He didn't go, oh, mast is broken, time to go home. Whatever we got, we got. No. He seems to like fix boat, finish mission. Very, very marine like.
Well, we see it there in the description. In one of the, I think it's, well, I can't point the paragraph, but there was an infinity of firmest fortitude, a determinate, unsurrenderable willfulness, in the fixed and fearless forward dedication of that glance, and I think that's the main character of Ahab is like. Oh, he has a telos. He has it like very firmly grasped. Like it is very firm and very determined.
He's
And he
not
will not
adrift,
let go.
that's for sure. He is not adrift
Yeah.
like Ishmael is.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention one other thing that I almost forgot from this chapter, that a lot of the guys are talking about, like they're kind of discussing Ahab's scar that goes from his face and then down into his clothing. And they don't really know exactly how far it goes. And I just wanted to point out that in a lot of these things, especially even with Ahab's Native American mother, like there's a lot of kind of premium that's put on like the discernment and like prophesying of the foreigners, and everything from like Ishmael conceding to Queequeg's Yojo and all of these things, and that there's this paragraph here that says that there was a Manxman with preternatural powers and discernment, so that no white sailors seriously contradicted him when he said that if ever Captain Ahab should be tranquilly laid out, which might hardly come to pass, so he muttered, that whoever should do the last office for the dead would find a birthmark on him from crown to sole. So he's like cracked from head to toe. But unfortunately, it doesn't say which foot that sole would be on.
That's some powerful symbolism. Does anybody care to give a treatise on the idea of having a tattoo or a birthmark or something from the head to toe, basically?
I'm gonna have something to say about it with respect to Stubbs' dream later.
Right,
but I'm not
that's what I figured.
So I was gonna go with a little bit of a different angle, right? Because he seems to have all of these markings where he's taking in the world, right? He's becoming part of the world, or the world is becoming a part of him, right? Like so like his leg, like now, like he is part whale, right? Like literally, and this scar is also like so he's carrying with himself the history, just like the ship, right? Like the ship also has all of these repairs done to it, and like integrating its environment into itself. So that's the way that I'm seeing that. I don't know about birthmarks. Like Mark should know about marks, but who knows?
Yeah, well, birthmarks are they again, I'm spitballing here, but I think birthmarks have to do with they're not controlled, right? They are marks on you forever that you did not choose. So they're a connection to fate, right? They're like it's an ode to destiny, right? And if that fate is thus divided and like straightly defining, right? He's like basically equally divided, right? From head to toe. Yeah, I don't know what that would mean for him, but it sounds intense.
Well, you could maybe see it a different way, right? Because like in some sense, it's also prophesizing, right? Like like it's a mark, right? Like a
Yeah.
mark it has meaning, right? And so it says something about you, and then like basically, if you say from head to toe, you can say from beginning to end, right? Like so,
Mhm.
like its life is determined, right? And that goes back to the telos aspect.
It's also not centered. It goes
Mm.
down the side of him. So there's
Oh.
an imbalance there in that a small part of this is broken off and not it's not been broken cleanly in half.
Right, and the beginning is talking about the scar you can see, and the speculation of whether or not he was born with it. But then there's this insinuation by the Indian, the gay-head Indian among the crew, superstitiously asserting not till he was 40 years old did he become that way branded.
Mhm.
Right?
And not in the fury of any mortal fray, but in an elemental strife at sea, like he had been marked by God himself.
Right. Right.
Is there a significance to 40 years? Because 30 years has significance and 50 years.
Is it 40 years of the desert? 40 years.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there we go. Never mind.
Like, is that a serious question from the Dutchman? Wait, no, and I think also, right, there's this wizened gray old man whose discernment is just assumed to be superior to everyone else's, who makes this claim about the mark from head to toe if he were split open. And it's explicit, like everybody just believes that. Like no one's prepared to question it because it's a wizened old man who clearly has superior discernment. It's like, wait a minute, it's just stated axiomatically, which is great. Like
Not just a wizened old man, but a wizened old Indian.
Right. Well, yeah, there's
Even
always
better.
that. Right. There's always that, superiority in the mysticism of the foreigner.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, to some extent, right? We're playing on the Protestantism of the United States.
I also want to add the color of his wound or his birthmark is described as lividly whitish, and he stands on his ivory leg, and there's a incredible chapter coming up on whiteness, but I wonder what you guys make of that.
Well, if it came from an elemental thing while he was at sea, then that might have been a lightning strike, which is also like a white pillar of light. So if he was struck by that at an odd angle.
Yes, the heavens are striking him down. I wonder if that tells us anything. Never mind that.
Coincidence.
2 strikes and you're out. Oh.
Alrighty. Do we want to talk about Ahab and Stubb? Talk about the two of their little interaction there. So, I think actually the point that the text makes is that Ahab was usually pretty careful not to walk around too much at night. But one time he wasn't, very early on in this voyage. And Stubb just comes up and he's, just trying to make a little negotiation. Like, what if we just, put a little something to dampen the sound? And Ahab intimidates the very Stubb that we've been reliably informed is fearless, right? He just doesn't care about fighting whales. But Ahab terrifies him. And boy, am I remembering the text correctly? kicks him.
Yeah.
I don't think that's clear in the text. I think
No,
what it
actually-
says is he doesn't get kicked, but then he feels like he did or something. It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah,
specific.
and then he dreams that he was kicked.
Then he did right,
Yeah.
but he first
And he
doesn't
thought
get
it
kicked.
righteous to be kicked, that it was an honor to be kicked by such a
Right,
character.
the dream justifies the daydream of being kicked. That's
Yeah.
the implication in the text. But again, unreliable narrator, so it's hard to know at that level.
RJ,
I-
go.
So I was listening while I stepped away. I really like the points that Castle and Diego made. Also, hi Diego, nice to meet you. Lucas, welcome. All that good stuff. As far as symbolism and prophecy goes, I have to just tell folks to check out John H. Walton's Lost series of. He has one on prophecy. To make a different book club entirely short. Um, Prophecy and prophets can be seen not as people who know what's going to happen, like Mr. Miyagi style or anything like that, although there's a Mr. Miyagi-ness to it. Um, there's something like when you have the syllabus for a class as a student, so they have access to, and Mark, you're like this, a pattern of sorts, one which they are looking back through authority and in some cases submitting to. But prophecy itself, and this is why I liked your point, Castle, is linked to dreams. It's both a male and masculine thing. Father, you can think about Miriam, and her sort of she's somehow not a prophet, but she's something else entirely. It's never named, and yet she creates the song by the sea. As again a road that goes through the sea, and then a song is sung. But just I could go on and on. But prophecy is something like the syllabus. The dream that is not reality that somehow helps us navigate reality. There is in that kick also the I think he brings this up. Knights get slapped when they become Knights of the Garter, which is a whole other conversation, which I could chat GPT real quick to remember what the Knights of the Garter are about.
In the old rite for
going back to the
confirmation, the confirmandi would be slapped.
Yeah, I think there's a connection there if I'm not mistaken. But going back to the kick and who's doing the kicking, well, the anointed guy is hitting you is kind of the point, as I understand it. But hopefully that wasn't too much.
Yeah, and I think he feels whacked in the spirit, right? Like if we go back to the analogy that we had, right? Like he was this guy who's basically unaware of what's driving him.
It's corrective. It's a corrective whack.
Right.
It's not one that
But-
causes you to get bent out of shape. It's perhaps one that causes you to get back in shape.
Right, but it's also something that's alien to him. Like I think that's the more important part, right? Like he like the wills don't phase him; they're like mice to him. But then this guy just bends his will, because like that's what happens, right? Like and like I've been talking a lot about rapes. Like he's invaded, right? Like there's a transgression made against him, and like he's having pages of like rants just to process. What
I think the
actually
R word's
occurred to
kind of
him.
one of those. Let's not talk about Bruno.
Yeah,
Just
that
for
sounds.
TOS, that's all.
It sounds like your weekly conversations, Manuel. This is people talking to you and trying to make sense of their lives afterwards. Oh, that's great.
Discord has a different TOS. That's all. I don't want things to.
Father Eric, I want to know. Whilst reading these chapters, I have this powerful desire to embody the text and just like do theater, basically just read it out loud.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to indulge in some of that because it's just like it's so colorful. It is so cool how these characters talk to each other. I can't help myself. So I don't know. I ask for permission, but
I'm open-minded. I don't want this to turn into the 5-hour book club.
yeah.
I want people to be able to actually keep up, so I kind of move things along.
Yeah, you got to keep them on the edge of their seats, Father.
Yeah.
You don't tell
Well,
the entire story in one homily.
I did.
Where's the
yeah,
fun in that?
I did a little reading there, Diego, but actually, I'd be interested if you'd read the "Am I a Cannonball" stub section where.
Yes,
where this
I
whole
was.
thing
I
happens.
was.
That would be lovely. I think you should. I think that would be lovely.
Okay, can we put it on screen? Am
Please
I a
do.
cannibal? Stop. Yeah. Am I a cannonball? Stop, said Ahab, that thou'st not wouldst wot me that fashion. But go thy ways, I had forgot. Below to thy nightly grave, where such as ye sleep between shrouds, to use ye to the filling one at last. Down, dog, and kennel.
That's great.
Like,
I appreciate that. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Yes.
down, dog, and kennel. What an expression. It's just
Somebody
it's
made
great.
a cool comment on the on live. If we could pull that up,
Yeah.
there we go.
There it
That's a
is.
really cool comment.
I love it, Diego. We need to do more in future. You're very good at that.
You're a good Ahab. That's for sure.
Who says poetry is the only thing that we read around here?
There you go. But I think it's like it's all like he's not. If you take a moment with the text, you realize he didn't say anything propositionally at all. Everything he said is symbolic and poetic, if you want to think of it that way. Everything is a reference to something else. And if you don't have that reference, the words he uses and the ordering of those words is irrelevant because you cannot understand it. You can't form a meaning from it because it's entirely referential outside of the text.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes the characters dreamlike, literally. It's just crazy.
Well, I think I will argue that all good stories use that method in character description. And because they can describe a character in a paragraph or three or something that gives the character a richness that in another style, let's say a more recent style of writing, a more propositional style, would take a book. And I think that's technically true. And maybe we're losing a little bit of that because we've lost, say, access to the Western canon. But you have to understand a cannonball and being wadded, right? And what the wad is and how it's stuffed into the cannon and why it's important, right? There's all this stuff in there, right? And then this idea of below to the nightly grave, sleep between the shrouds. Like we really don't have shrouds anymore in the coffin, right? Or in the grave. Right. That's an older reference. And then this idea of down dog and kennel, like kennels are not new. And kennel meant something slightly different back then than what it means now. And so basically what I'm saying is this is all symbolic. The entire thing that you read was just symbolism, like times a billion. It's just nothing but symbolic, and you have to understand the references.
I think it's also important to say, right? Because like there's an implication of the cannonball being subjected, right? And then he flips the authority structure back with the dog and the kennel, right? So that is an important sense, and I like this dreamlike thing that you said, Diego, right? Because this goes into also that Ahab is this character that you can't put your hand on, right? Like what just happened, right? Like this poor stub, right? Like he's completely lost it, right? But all the people watching, they're also like, what just transpired? Like
as
not
far
real.
as like weird stuff that people say that's really symbolic that comes from this area and the American lineage to our earlier point in the session, I'm just going to put this book on screen for real quick. It's called Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. Super duper weird, totally different book club.
Put it back up real quick.
It's called Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. This is the original 1855 edition. I like the first edition. But if you can take what we're talking about here and learn to perhaps see through the prism of sort of symbology when you have aphoristic characters like this, Whitman becomes much more accessible. And so does a lot of American poetry, as intensely spoon gazing as Thoreau can be, and etc. Sorry for the distraction, but I'm here to distract apparently today.
Alrighty. While we're on the topic of Ahab, what do you guys make of the pipes? If you remember back to the introduction of Stubb, he's always smoking, and Melville gives us this phrase like, the smoke of the pipe filtered out all of the anxieties of the world. And that's why Stubb was always so cheerful. It's just because he was always smoking, and none of the anxieties of the world could get in there. And after this encounter, Ahab tries to smoke, and he doesn't find any relief in that.
You can't obscure the world from him. And that's actually related to the symbolism of wadding the foot. I don't want anything in between my experience and the world.
That sounds like a little bit of hubris right there.
Then you misread it. It's a lot of hubris, Father.
Well, it's also a desanctification, right? Like because when you enter the holy place, you have to take off your shoes, right? And there's this element where when you put something in between the earth and the other, right, like their foot, then like what are you doing to them, right? Like you're disconnecting them, you're removing them from that which grounds them, which is
But and he's basically saying you're a dead person to me anyway. Then he threatens him explicitly, which I find amazing. He says I won't be spoken to that way, basically, right? Like you can't talk to me like that. And then he sets his teeth, right, grits his teeth, and then moves away violently, right, to avoid some passionate temptation, which I find fascinating, right? And then Stubbs continues, "No, sir, not yet." He said, Stubbs emboldened, right? "I will not tamely be called a dog, sir." Now, to your point, Father, Stubbs is in a cloud, able to shield himself from the world. The cloud filters the world for him, but not from Ahab. It doesn't work, right? And then he says, "Then be called 10 times a donkey and a mule and an ass, and be gone, or I'll clear the world of thee." And then he changes his mind about moving away and move towards him until he retreats effectively, which is sort of amazing. And this is where you get the impression that he wasn't struck, but he wish he was, right? Because he says, "I was never served so before without giving a hard blow for it." And so he's kind of, I would normally have hit somebody who said that, right? And so then he hallucinates the battle, basically the kick.
right. He's constructing the validation for his action in order to maintain his
and the first, like the second thing he mentions is very interesting. He says it's very queer. Stop. Somehow now I don't well know whether to go back and strike him or what's that? Go down here on my knees and pray for him.
Yeah.
It's how the human condition just reacts. And it's like, okay, should I be terrified or angry or actually feel compassion?
And he's never prayed before. That would be the first time. So that's
I did pray.
Too, right? Like, I've never prayed before, but now suddenly I feel like praying for him or hitting him. What? Like talk about story limits, taking stories to the limit.
Amazing.
And I think the pipe also has something to do with the revelation, right? Like it's Ahab starts talking about this idea, right? Like that this pipe was providing him with this cloud, like this soothing, right? And then he sees something, right? He's revealed himself as well, right? In that action that previously transpired, and he can't go back, right? Like there's a transformation that has happened that he can't maintain the facade, right? Like his self-delusion of the comfort of the pipe.
I have a question, which feel free to totally ignore this one. If a pipe is something where you're inhaling fire, which the pipe being a vessel, like the ship being a vessel in this case, would suggest feminine. And I'm kind of aiming this at Manuel, but anyone feel free. Truly anyone. So again, a pipe by itself seems to be something along the lines of the feminine, and yet there's this element of fire and transformation and etc. The weapon is very clearly some sort of right-handed thing in the sense of certain kinds of symbology. Staying within the text, I've never been able to identify where the weapons are held or how the handedness is held and etc. So this is ultimately an unanswerable question. But if you have a weapon that is also a pipe, I guess that means you can hold it in any hand you want.
Yes.
If you're just being symbolic. But like the mast and the inversion of the ship, this is, to me, perhaps a microcosm of that earlier identification. And this is something that, just because I was futzing around with what is actually a magnetic pointer and a little fidget toy, I just was thinking about that.
Yeah.
So does anybody have any thoughts?
The way I see a pipe is like the offering to God, right? Like you have the smoke that lifts up, and in some sense you're partaking in the smoke of, right? Like, and it's even through the mouth, right? So like your speech, well, it's not really speaking, but like your spirit, right, is going up to God. Like that's the way I see that kind of.
Well, it's
Hmm.
interesting.
Makes it so-
I see it.
Sorry. Also, whereas a water bottle is clearly a vessel and container, here we have a weapon. I'll just use a pen. A pen, like a harpoon, is contained not like a water bottle. Maybe I should put a tinfoil hat on here. But like when you put them two together, then you're giving something that has an opening, a doorway of sorts, to the weaponness. And
I
not
mean,
everybody,
that's all about
has. Yeah.
Queequeg's pipe.
Right.
We
Sorry,
don't
I'm
get
thinking
any
about
indication. We don't get any indication that Stubb or Ahab are smoking those manner of pipes. Given the sense that they're just smoking in the common Western way of smoking a pipe, which is like this.
Right.
Or
So
like
again,
this, I guess.
I think pipes are cool. So I've been thinking about this all week, and then was just futzing around. So, but does anybody else have any thoughts on just kind of like, I guess, if there are multiple pipes and we're looking at what's the leg made out of?
Well, like
I'm just
let's
thinking out
add
loud at this point.
this to it, right? Like so, white vapors among white hairs, and then iron gray, right? So that's iron, which is making it grounded. Logs like mine, I'll smoke no more, right? So there's a sense that the smoke is going up to the hair, and we're connecting back the whiteness to what Castor was saying, right? Like I lost it. I think it was the leg. Oh yeah, and the scar, right? They were also both white. And then Ahab self-identifies as iron gray, and in some sense he's not worthy of the smoke, right? Like it's like a false offering, like going back to Cain and Abel, because I see Cain and Abel all over here.
I also want to add that it's explicitly stated a few paragraphs before that Ahab is sitting on this tripod of bones, and I mean he's explicitly saying what the symbolism here for Khan of the plank, a king of the sea, a great lord of leviathans was Ahab, and so he's a king now. He's at the highest point, and to me, he's waving off the smoke. He's trying to, like you say, desanctify and see what's behind the smoke. In some sense, now that he's a king.
King who sits on the throne of that which has wounded him.
And I think like yeah, he's self-crowned, and now he's in the open, right? Like now he's at a different relationship to the ship after this point.
But we don't know what crowned him really yet.
Can someone remind me what the Pajot video was where he looks at the passion and how it fractalizes down, but they're specifically about, and Father, you can do this better than I can, the way that Christ is on top of the skull at Golgotha, and it's in the artwork, it's Adam's skull, and I'm seeing Ahab as a parallel, dynamically parallel, not the same, not again, I brought up the Moses thing, but dynamically parallel to that. Am I off base here? I'm not Christian.
You threw like 5 things at me, and I can handle maybe 2 at a time.
Is it inappropriate to to juxtapose the image of Christ at Pajot walks through here at Ahab atop his seat, his throne?
Well, it is inappropriate, but I don't think that'll stop Ahab.
I just want to say, guy, I do. If for the fact you said that, I very much apologize.
Yeah.
That was not my intention. Again,
No. I don't think it's your
try
intention.
to know my boundaries, guys.
I don't think it's your intention. I do think it's Ahab's intention.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'd like to make a few comments that that kind of bring. I had some thoughts from the previous chapter that I'm going to bring into this one, and the way that Ahab kind of throws away his pipe. So there's a line earlier in the previous chapter, and then I'm going to jump much further ahead, where it says, "Old age is always wakeful, as if the longer linked with life, the less man has to do with aught that looks like death." So Ahab is now getting older, and he wants less and less to do with the renewal state of sleeping, and he's staying awake, as it says later in the chapter. It says he ain't in his bed now either more than 3 hours out of the 24, and he don't sleep then. So he's barely even sleeping for 3 hours. So he's getting major. By the time that he's going and shouting at Stubb, he's sleep deprived for who knows how long. And he's also been coming out into the light more and more. And then it also mentions that his pillow, even after he's left, like presumably enough time has passed that they're able to sneak in behind him without Ahab accosting them for coming into his room. They feel his pillow and it's still blazing hot as if it had a baked brick. And it says it's kind of a tic dolly row, which is like a type of like a neurological like kind of twitch sort of thing, worse nor a toothache. And it says that he's also kind of going off and doing kind of unusual things around the ship during that time. But I'm seeing this thing of, you've got the guy who his ship lost a pillar, he lost a pillar. He was the pillar that brought the ship back in many ways. He's got a quiver of pillars, all of which are, stark white. And then he also has the white chair and the white pipe. It's like pillars all day long, but he's encroaching into the night, so he's not allowing himself to rest. He's not letting other people rest because he's clanging around the ship with his white, bone pillar. And then he goes and he doesn't find rest or renewal from the smoking. And so he completely throws it away. So he's probably also going to wind up with some sort of tobacco withdrawals on top of the sleep deprivation. But I'm sure everyone will be super happy about that. But I'm just seeing this kind of thing, and I'll bring this up in the next chapter when we talk about the dream a little bit. But I'm seeing so much more of like the Nebuchadnezzar's dream thing, and like him trying to do like the full gold statue, and then make everyone like it's just no, we're going to have 100% order top down. And I'm going to encroach on all of the little idiosyncrasies and stuff at the bottom. No more recreation, no more sleep. I'm staying awake all day. Even when I'm in bed, I'm not even sleeping properly. And I'm not going to do anything recreational.
Casty, do you still have any of those diagrams from the other day? Or any of those useful here? Because the triangle one might be.
I want to talk about triangles. I want to talk about triangles real bad, because we got a triangle to talk about. We got to talk about the big triangle in Stubbs' dream, because I have no idea what it means, but it's definitely meaningful.
Oh no, Castle will fix that for us. But just before we move off, I just want to point out, because Castle did an excellent job, but I just want to make it more explicit and hopefully a little shorter. Right, there's a change coming over Ahab. The old order of Ahab is leaving Ahab. That is explicit. Even smoking doesn't give him the pleasure it used to. And he doesn't seem to put out about that. He seems to just accept it and move on as part of his metamorphosis might be the way to think about it the best.
Yeah, and I think going into the night, right? Like the night is the fulfillment, right? Like it's the closing off. And if you stay awake, you don't let the closing happen, right? So that's like resisting the transformation or that which is supposed to happen.
And he throws the pipe into the chaos. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean water. Oh no, wait. I meant chaos. And it kind of sits there and then sinks.
And goes against the ship as well.
Right.
And then Ahab is off balance with a slouched hat. Ahab lurchingly paced the planks.
Oh
He's-
yeah. I was gonna
Off
mention too,
base.
the flaming sword that turns on itself. That you got this guy that he's now heating up, and he has unusual twitches, and now he's slouching as soon as he gets rid of his renewal stuff.
Yeah, so everything is just curving now, despite him trying to give the impression of being straight up and pointing straight up. So Stubb tells Flask about his dream where he was kicked by Ahab's ivory leg, and he tries to kick back, and he kicks his leg right off, and then Ahab turns into a pyramid, and Stubb keeps on kicking at it, and then he's like, well, actually, I was only kicked by Ahab's false leg. I wasn't kicked by his real leg. And actually, that makes it much, much better to be kicked by the false leg than it was by the real leg. And so I just stopped kicking at the pyramid. Did I get all of that? There was a lot in there.
Well, his leg, it's Stubbs' leg that comes off.
Mm-hmm.
Not Ahab's. See, he can't touch Ahab. And then Ahab turns into a pyramid, and somehow with only one leg, Stubb keeps kicking. It's a great, this is probably the best dream sequence I've ever read in terms of boy, that does sound like a dream. That really does sound exactly like you would relay a dream to somebody.
And then there's a merman with a hump on his back, and I think Stubb threatens to kick him.
Yep.
Yeah, and he happens to have a bunch of poisonous scales under him or something.
Well, but there's a bunch of revealing. And so I think Castle's probably the best to talk about the symbolism or the transformation of Ahab from Ahab into a pyramid. So do you have stuff to say about that, Castle? Because this is
I do.
I think that Merman comes next on purpose, because then there's a different type of revealing going on in that section from, we'll say, the pyramid section.
To foreshadow just a little bit before, and I'm kicking myself, but the word ergagor or ergagor is actually not the word that people might be searching for, I think, as far as the second part of that. But let's stick with triangles.
True.
Before I do the pyramid thing, and hopefully not in too verbose a way, but I wanted to say something to support RJ's previous point about Ahab as Moses' figure. Something that I just noticed, just here within the last couple of minutes. So Stubb kicks his own leg off when trying to return the strike to Ahab, whether it's possibly to his leg, because what is he going to aim for? But I'm getting a lot of kind of images here of Moses's staff when he has it with the magician's snakes, and how while in staff form, the staff eats the snakes, and they become the staff in many ways. So the thing that is kind of disagreeing with the pillar is then integrated into it. So now we're going to see a lot of rationalization of stuff, then saying oh, actually, he's not such a bad guy, and actually it's an honor to have even been struck by this guy. It's just oh, he's becoming a part of Ahab's staff in a lot of ways, or part of his leg, having kind of lost his leg, and then that has been sort of consumed and subsumed by this white pillar of
having his leg taken off means he's taken on Ahab's identity as one of the one-legged people.
Yeah.
Father,
then he's-
as host of the stream, you don't have anything to whack us with, do you?
I can always do this.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I did want to make just kind of because I've been for chapters upon chapters that I've been mentioning Nebuchadnezzar's statue and everything. And it's so much of this that in Mensur Peugeot's book, there's so much of this stuff about kind of the conical hierarchy, very connected to like a mountain, which is also considered a pillar. I mean, he actually explicitly describes, the mountain of the curse and the mountain of the blessing as different pillars and everything. So you have this kind of aspect of, okay, the pillar gets struck, and then Stubb is now brought into his staff. Like, he's also one of his staff members on the ship. But he's there fighting this pillar, and he keeps on kicking him over and over again. But it's that one of the things that is kind of described in the language of creation is that that Nebuchadnezzar's statue can be likened to a pyramid, because it's a statue of a guy in a conical robe. So you have this kind of thing where now the entire thing is completely solid and kind of impenetrable, but also it's not completely conical. Like, it's an edgy, it has edges to it. And so it's like, it's even more rigid. It's like 100% just, edge and, a pillar the entire way through. And then Stubbs, as he said, is kind of now participating in Ahab's identity more. But I wanted to mention the merman. He goes and wants to kick the merman, who has the twisted face, and he's this kind of like underwater creature and everything. But the marlin spikes is actually, I'm not sure if it's exactly this, but I think there's a type of tool, like these are called marlin spikes.
Yes.
And so he has a bunch of possibly white pillars on his back that would then strike Stubbs in his only remaining foot if he were to strike him. And then he's described as wise for not kicking him.
But he transforms. Like, Stubbs doesn't see the marlin spikes. He's slewn around or something. It's like, what? And it's very weird poetic language. It's very symbolic, to your point. If you need more symbolism, it's the Language Creation Book Club on navigating patterns. There's an explicit revealing with the merman. There was no revealing with Ahab. He transformed.
Yeah.
But now there's a revealing. And then what that leads to ultimately is, him calling himself wise, it looks like, or being referred to as wise. And then ultimately, when he asks his interlocutor, what do you think of the dream? He says, seems foolish to me, though. And he said, maybe, but it's made a wise man of me. So there's some wisdom imparted as the result of the dream. And that's kind of interesting, right? That there's a transformation of Ahab into a pyramid, right? And then he gleans some wisdom from that. He still wants to take his anger out. He goes to take his anger out on some mythical, weird creature that, look, it may be a mythical creature to you and I, but people on the sea would almost certainly have actually believed in mermen as a creature you could encounter and experience and have an interaction with, or at least the anticipation of such a thing. That mermen and mermaids were definitely on the table, along with giant squid and Leviathan and other things. These are all, things that come out of chaos, and really anything can come out of chaos ultimately. And that's the interesting thing is, there's this dichotomy between foolishness and wisdom. And the fact that he gets it from a dream, which I think is very biblical in some sense, Father, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I mean, the dream doesn't always come with wisdom. So like Nebuchadnezzar's dream didn't come with wisdom. He needed somebody else's wisdom to actually explain that. And that is explained in by Thomas Aquinas, if you want to know more.
Good old Tommy.
Doesn't Nebuchadnezzar's wisdom come after he's out like grazing the fields as if he was some sort of
he needed a lot of wisdom. He
Yeah,
needed
like-
continual wisdom and infusions. Otherwise, he got very lost and confused.
and the infusions come in many ways in forms of like strikes.
Yeah.
Marley spikes, so to speak.
So I have a bunch of things to say. So what's a pyramid? Like pyramid is something that has a really large base, so you can't move them. Like they're just as solid as it gets, right? So if you kick something that's as solid as it gets, right, like you're gonna have to yield, right? And to be stern is to enact discipline, right? So you can also look at the sterners as and the spikes in the sterners is like I'm not challenging the discipline like that, which is well, which being said cannot be challenged, right? So that goes back to the base, right? Like there's like these truths, right? Like these groundednesses that were in the discipline of Ahab. That is what he can't fight, because that's what his dream is about. Like he's trying to fight that which is inevitable, and he can't he can't seem to make it bud. He can't seem to make it move, right? And then he's transferring like, okay, like what is the thing, right? Like what is the problem? Like what is the thing that hit me, right? So he goes into, well, it was a leg, right? But it wasn't a fleshy leg, because if it was a fleshy leg, that would have been uh, in relation, right? So like now he's making this other distance, right? But he can't maintain that distance, right? Because he still feels like it hit him, right? Like it actually directly connected to his person, right? So he's trying to grab perspectives, and like I have dreams like this where I'm like, okay, let's go to this other perspective and then re-engage with the problem, and you go back in another perspective, and you just keep trying to get in control of this thing that you're gonna lose out to.
Manuel, on that point, I'll send it to you. Vervaeke gave a talk to the folks at Cambridge, specifically reviewing the literature. Mark, you can probably do this better justice than I can, but it was reviewing the literature that was collected by a bunch of team members and engineers who were working on the Mars rover, or a Mars rover, who started having dreams from the perspective of a robot, which is an inanimate object that lacks agency. Whether or not there is agency is a different conversation. What's in the name? Anyway, it's a very interesting study. It's a good talk. I would just say it's relevant here and it's interesting, but I hate to interrupt. But that's what I do.
And I think to use that perspective, right? Like we try to inhabit the perspective of, well, what would it be, like virtues or like these higher things, right? And we use these higher things to try and kick at something that we're trying to process, right? And then maybe that will make it move, or maybe it won't, right? But like I think that's kind of the experimentation that we're in.
If I might sort of summarize maybe what happened here, well, at the end of this dream, Ahab also gives his first command. He says, "Look sharp, all of you. There are whales hereabout. If you see a white one, split your lungs for him." And to me, what I hear after this dream is Ahab has established his authority, and and through Stubb has exemplified obedience to the king, and now Ahab really is the captain. And that's kind of what's been happening over the last few chapters, is sort of establishing the top, I guess.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, and he does it in top-down order, or emanation order, if you want to put it that way, right? Where Ahab, I didn't mention this, but maybe I should have. I don't know. At the beginning, the first description of him is disembodied and perfect, and like this authority, this voice from the void almost, right? But also from the sacred void, the sacred authority. and then it gradually gets more materialized or brought down, and then it gets brought into the dream realm. And then Lucas, I loved your summary, by the way, it's fantastic. But I think his first order is after the expression of the dream, right, where he's coming out of relaying the dream and saying to his interlocutor, "Oh, hark, my king or my god or whatever is talking here," right? Like, let's pay attention. And then we get what is most important, which is your first foreshadowing of the importance of a white whale, because they're not anywhere near halfway through their journey, right? They're not halfway through in distance, they're not halfway through in time. They're just starting out their journey, and we've already established. Look sharp, all ye, there are whales hereabouts. If ye see a white one, split your lungs for him. In other words, call out loudly.
And I roughly, and I got to be careful with this, but I've been hearing themes of the transfiguration here. I'm not super, biblically astute, but is there anything there that you can grab onto, like over the last few chapters, like this sort of this ascent up the mountain, and then the pipe, the smoke, and then the pyramid dream?
That is absolutely going to be there, and we will get to it in a later chapter.
Okay, fair enough.
That's just how well woven. Don't pull on that. You don't know what it's connected to. So yeah, that's basically it. We've been going 2 hours, gentlemen, and I think this was another delightful discussion. I'm grateful for each and every single one of you and your participation, because you all noticed things that I didn't notice all on my own. And that's why we do these book clubs. So thank you all, and God bless.
God bless.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Ciao.